also get a lot of questions just in general on the discipline.
So you're the man to turn to if I have a question on the discipline related to ordained ministry or everything.
A lot of times it's everything, and Carol Wilson and I spent some time years ago in, how do you understand this? What is this? And of course the final authority on the discipline is always the bishop. And so it is the bishop when you get to a point where you're in impasse, you say, okay, Bishop, what is this?
What is the interpretation by which we must live?
Right.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Hello, this is Pastor Terry Goodman, and I want to welcome you to the Wesleyan Connection. This podcast is primarily for the clergy and laity of the Holston Annual Conference. Join with me now as I take a look around the connection and share some of the things happening in the churches of our annual conference. Welcome to today's podcast. Today I'm talking with Dan Taylor. Now, most of you would recognize Dan as the guy that sits beside the bishop on stage at annual conference. He is the secretary of the annual conference, one of two elected officials. I didn't realize we had just two elected officials, but he and the treasurer are elected by the annual conference. And so he has a very important role to play in helping make sure the annual conference functions. But there's more to Dan than just those 3 or 4 days we see him at annual conference. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that goes on. He's involved with the Board of Ordained Ministry and everything relating to licensing and various other kinds of record-keeping requirements for the various persons who are seeking to become ministers. He's involved in the Wesley Leadership Institute, leading it, and he's involved with, just listen to the conversation. Dan is involved in a lot of things, and he does a lot of work behind the scenes. And so sit back and maybe get a view of Dan that you've never had before as I talk with Dan Taylor about the work he does for the annual conference. Hi, I'm here with Dan Taylor right now. Dan, could you give us an idea of what your title is and a description of what you do at the annual conference?
Yeah, sure. I am the conference secretary and director of clergy services. Basically, what that amounts to is I have responsibility for maintaining clergy records and some other basic record information for the general church, but primarily for the conference. So I have everybody who has gone through candidacy, ordination, licensing. We have, the process. We handle a process for that. I relate to the Board of Ordained Ministry. I'm one of two elected officers in the conference. Conference secretary is an elected position, and the treasurer is the other elected position. So there are only really two elected officers in the conference, and we do that every quadrennium. The bishop is president by position, by being the bishop, and so that's what we do. We maintain records. We do some publications, the journal. I also am. I've taken on the role of the director of the Wesley Leadership Institute, so we do convocation and work on trying to provide or identify continuing ed kinds of opportunities for folks, that kind of thing.
So most folks, when they think of you, probably see you in your annual conference role, sitting up there on stage. So in other words, you do work more than like 4 days a year, don't you?
That's true. That's true. And the funny part, when I'm at annual conference, I am strictly the conference secretary because I've done all the clergy services work before I get there. So people who are coming in to be ordained or to be commissioned or receive a permanent license as associate member or get a license, we've done all of that work prior to annual conference. And so really when I walk into annual conference on Sunday evening, when we have the clergy session. I'm really the conference secretary then, because we're doing what are called the BACs, the Business of the Annual Conference, which are that series of questions that the Board of Ordained Ministry chair goes through and the clergy vote on. But that all goes in to the general conference, and that all comes to me as the conference secretary, and not as the director of clergy services. So all that work's been done before I get there.
Okay, so it sounds like you have a lot of details to have to deal with.
Yes.
Yours is not sort of a macro view kind of position as much as it is a micro view.
That's true. I spend a lot of time with the discipline, making sure that we're following what the discipline says for somebody to be licensed, because we have so many categories of clergy.
And depending on the year they started, the discipline may change, but they still work through under the discipline they began with, right?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Pretty much the standards of what you do are the same. So really what happens is when a new discipline comes in, the other disciplines go away, unless that discipline the new one refers back and says, this is still in play for people who start here. But it really doesn't impact somebody, because you're right. We set the standards. The Board of Ordained Ministry says we're going to have somebody go through 3 years of residency as a provisional member. Well, that doesn't change. So you're right. If they start on a 3-year program and we just suddenly went to 2, the person who started in 3 would have to do 3, and the 2 would go into effect. So you're right. There are things like, and this really has played out as the board has added requirements for education. So I have to go back and look at somebody's transcript and say, okay, when did you start? And say, these apply to this one, and if you started after this date, these apply to this one. So you do look through details. Have they completed all the education requirements? So I go through a lot of transcripts during the year, It becomes really interesting, especially when we have people who are coming to us from other denominations, and then finding out what it is they will need to do, especially if they went to a non-United Methodist related or approved seminary. Then that goes to, those transcripts go to Nashville. They tell me what they need to do, and then I tell them, okay, here's what you'll need to do to be a provisional member and then an elder in its annual conference. So there's a lot of detailed work, a lot of work. I also get a lot of questions just in general on the discipline.
So you're the man to turn to if I have a question on the discipline related to ordained ministry or everything.
A lot of times it's everything, and Carol Wilson and I spent some time years ago in, how do you understand this? What is this? And of course the final authority on the discipline is always the bishop. And so it is the bishop when you get to a point where you're at an impasse, you say, okay, Bishop, what is this?
What is the interpretation
right.
by which we must live?
Right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. So she's always whoever the bishop is, they're the one you always turn to and say, how do we interpret this?
Also in there, so you do Board of Ordained Ministry related materials. You're the secretary of the annual conference. I'm assuming that's probably where the journal and those kind of things fit in.
Journal, book of reports. We produce the directory. We do. Those are our big publications. We're going through a process right now to where we're going to try to change how we produce the journal, not physically produce it, because we find sometimes it's hard to get everything that we do. And one of the things people don't realize is I have one administrative assistant. I have two, but they do two different things, and one of the two I share with Rusty Taylor in congregational development. So I have one administrative assistant, and along with trying to do the journal, the directory, the book of reports, we have for the last 3 years hosted licensing school here, 4 years now, I guess, since Buffalo Mountain went down. So a lot of that has fallen to her. We do candidacy summits here, and that has fallen to her. And I teach during the course, the licensing school. And so we've added to what we do that we didn't do before. And it's really been difficult to do everything, and to do everything we do, or we're expected to do, because we've got timelines. You know, people say, well, why can't you get the journal out, in the same year? Well, we don't. The first thing we have to do is the directory, because that goes in the journal. Well, we can't start on the directory until sometime in July, late July, early August, because all of that information is entered by the districts, and they can't do that until everybody is in place and they have, the information they need to put in. Do you have an email address? Do you have an email address? Do you have this? What changes? And so they enter all of that in, and once we're told that's done, then Sandy C., who administers our database, locks it down and says, okay, we can pull now and see. And so there's a lot that goes on in this. Part of the thing we had this year was that we changed how we do elections now. We went from sort of an every year kind of thing to going into a quadrennial election, and that's we had our first time this year to have a nominating committee following that. And the good news was that our nominating committee lasted 2 hours as opposed to all day, because we didn't have a lot of people we had to change. But the problem we had was in the shift to quadrennial elections, it took a while to get everything in place, and so we were still working on the Board of Ordained Ministry in November.
Yes, I think that's when I got my invitation to come on board with the Board of Ordained Ministry.
And so that, I mean, it was so late in the year that we couldn't put the journal together because we couldn't get all the nominations done. So, but we're going to go to a setup where every piece now is going to be a module, and so it'll be an A module, a B module. Like the business will be here, the reports will be here, the memoirs and retirement things will be here, statistics will be here. And so if we need to add a page in, it'll only impact the module, it won't impact the whole book. And we'll be able to drop modules in place, and hopefully in the 2017 journal we'll be able to get it out faster, because we should be able to get everything into a module, and we won't have to.
So currently you're sort of just paginating and laying out the whole thing, and if page 294 you need to add a 295 in there,
everything gets repaginated. And it's a lot of work, and it really is a lot of work when you talk about one person trying to do a book that's 1,000 pages and making sure that everything is like it's supposed to be, that as you drop those pages in, that the program doesn't wrap and move something into someplace else that you don't want it to, and so it's a lot of work for somebody to do. Everybody said computers would make your life easier. Well, not so much.
Once you get the data in, maybe your life is easier.
But not so much, because where you used to be able to do this with a bunch of folks, now you have one person who actually does the bulk of it, and then I try to, then I get it and try to go through it to make sure that that everything looks like it's supposed to. Because if you're the one who's doing it all the time, you don't see the things that you've looked at 100 times, and something gets past you. So, but we do a lot of work. It doesn't end. We should be. We ought to be close to now going to print, and then we start writing the book of reports.
I know I've got the letters saying I've got to turn in the various pages for my portion of the book of reports. So I will try to get those in on time so that your job will be easier, Dan.
We greatly appreciate that.
Well, let me close out with 2 questions.
Okay.
One of them, the first one is, what is the passion or the reason that you are in ministry? Why do you do this thing that you do for our annual conference?
Well, I guess the first thing I ought to say is that I didn't really expect to do this. I didn't. I really expected that I would serve a church someplace. When I was called, everybody thought I was going to go into music because I had sung. That's how I got to the Methodist Church, was singing. And when I said no, I don't understand my call as music. I understand my call as pastoral ministry, and that's exactly what I went to seminary to do. If I had known I was going to end up here, I wouldn't have had to go to seminary to do this. And not that I am glad I went. I loved my 3 years at Candler, but I had worked for an insurance company, and my last job at the insurance company, in a lot of ways, is exactly like what I do now. My last job was I managed the group life claims office, so it was a lot of detail. What does the booklet say? What does the contract say? You have people die in the most unusual ways, and sometimes there's a question: was this an accident? Was this suicide? What was it? And so you have to go through what is this? What does the death certificate tell us? And I had some training in the company for contract issue, booklets, contracts. So when I went to the life office, somebody would come in and I'd say, well, in the booklet there should be a page that says so-and-so, do so-and-so. So I had that detail. Plus I had trained, I had learned and had written part of the manual, worked with a group that we wrote the manual when the company developed its first computer claim payment system. And I went out across the country and trained that, and I actually have a master's in training. And so when I didn't expect any of this. I expected to finish my life at the insurance company, went through a downsizing, had been struggling with a call, went off to seminary in 96, graduated in 99, went to Lyndon Senior in East Knoxville, was there 4 years, expected to be there 5 when one Saturday morning Ray Chamberlain called me. And then I found out I was going on the cabinet and went to Big Stone Gap, as you know.
I'm familiar with that.
Yes, you are. And lived there 5 years and loved the 5 years I was in Big Stone Gap. Loved the people there. Stay in touch with folks by Facebook, and occasionally we've gone back to visit. And in my 3rd year, I guess, Bishop Swanson asked me, he was there to visit, had met with my superintendency committee, asked me what did I want to do when it came time for me to come off the cabinet. And I said, well, I'm here as long as you want me to be here. I said, it's your pleasure. I said, but, I said, if I had a choice, I'd like to have Grady's job, because Grady Weiniger was in this job. He said, really? I said, yeah. I said, I've got the skills for it. And I had replaced Denny Humphreys in Big Stone Gap, and Denny had tried to get Ray to move me in his job because it was Raymond White that he retired, And but Ray said no. He wanted me to be a superintendent. And it was funny. I said that, and then in the spring at appointment week, Bishop Swanson said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, the rumor is that Grady's going to retire next year." And so that's what happened. So in my 5th year, he asked me one morning, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, I'm going to make that announcement to the cabinet." And so I came, and it fit my skill set. This really fit my skill set because records management, detail work, that kind of stuff. I do a lot of, I answer a lot of questions for folks. I do a lot of research for people who are looking to find a relative who used to be, a clergy person back when. And I say, well, if you can give me some years, I maybe could be able to help you. So that's one.
Okay. Final question.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite dessert?
Oh, gee.
Long pause.
Strawberry pie.
Strawberry pie. With a lot of gel on it, or just more strawberries?
Well, you know who my mother-in-law is.
No, I'm not familiar with who you.
My mother-in-law is Nancy Brown. She's the widow of Jack Brown, who was an elder in this annual conference. Jack died right after Christmas, but Nancy Brown is a tremendous cook and is a killer dessert maker.
Oh, kind of mother-in-law you want.
Yeah, and she, you get to choose your birthday cake with her.
Okay.
And so my birthday cake is carrot cake, which was also, she made both our wedding cakes. And so Dinah got a spice cake, and I got a carrot cake for the groom's cake. But about a year and a half ago, she surprised. We came in we usually have dinner with my niece and nephew on Monday or Tuesday night. They're both in college now, and so when their schedules allow, and she had made a strawberry pie, scratch crust.
Sounds good.
It is. So year before last, that I got carrot cake and strawberry pie for my birthday.
You must be on her good side.
Well, since I'm her only son-in-law.
I was going to say, are you the only son-in-law?
I'm the only son-in-law. I'm her favorite son-in-law.
That's the best place to be.
It is. But I love my mother-in-law. She's great.
Well, I appreciate you sharing with us this afternoon, and I hope to see you up there on stage at Annual Conference.
I'll be there.
Thank you.
This is Pastor Goodman. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Wesleyan Connection. Be sure to check back often for more podcasts.